What's going on, everybody? Ian Ewing here with another episode of Titletown Talk. We are going to preview the wide receiver position for the 2025 NFL Draft today. We're going to talk about all the wide receiver prospects that the Packers will be interested in. Some of you guys have already been messaging me. I've had some family ask me as well about the potential wide receiver prospects in the draft. There are only a certain group of them that the Packers will even be interested in. We will talk through that. Before we do, really quick, we are on the eve of free agency, the calm before the storm, and my God, has it been anything but calm today. We just got news that Davante Adams will be joining the LA Rams. So those of you that have been listening this whole time, you know how sad that is for me, because I truly thought that Davante would have made a lot of sense coming back to the Packers, but he will be joining the LA Rams, and boy, oh boy, that's a really fun offense over there. Matt Stafford, Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Tyler Higbee, and now Davante Adams. And they obviously, we know what their defense looked like at the end of the year last year with Jared Verse. Just another reason that Goody and the Packers have got to get this offseason right. I mean, the Rams are a real contender. I think that they're going to come out of the West next year with relative ease. So, yeah, we need to talk about the wide receiver position in the draft. Before we do, though, I do want to leave the caveat that I do have my phone open just in case there's a DK Metcalf trade. The latest and greatest there. Looks like the Seahawks have lowered their asking price. It's not going to be a first and a third anymore. But whoever does acquire DK is going to have to give him a brand new contract, probably in that $30 million range. I'm not convinced that the Packers will do it, despite DK being a really, really good fit for the Packers. So, without further ado, let's talk about the wide receiver class in the 2025 NFL Draft. We know the Packers need a receiver. It's not quite that simple, though. They need a guy who they can look to beat man coverage. Whether that be a technical route runner type, right, like a Davante, or maybe it's a guy with deep speed who can force the defense into zone coverage and who can throw off the defense a little bit. Basically, they need a guy who can replace Christian Watson for the first 12 weeks. Now, some of you might remember that Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, this is their last season under contract with the Packers, so they're going to need to build this wide receiver position. So we're going to talk today about each fit, both why they're a fit for the Packers, why they fit the credential or the criteria that they look for in a receiver. But we're also going to talk about, will they help in 2025, or are they going to be a guy who they're sort of building around for the future? Okay, so two separate things. Like I said, we need to separate between this season and then what they need in essentially 2 seasons, right? Or even next season, 2026, right? Remember, Goody's not just drafting for 2025, but also future seasons. Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson are both free agents after this season. So, again, they need that man beater guy like we talked about, but they also need receiver depth in general, because in a year, if Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson don't re-sign, all they have is Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks, which, again, solid. But we don't know if those two are even going to be any good. Right? We really don't. We know Jaden Reed's probably going to be really good. I think Dontavian Wicks is going to be really good. But we don't have any evidence that they're going to be, the next Greg Jennings or, Jordy Nelson or Davante, whoever, right? So the first question we have to ask is, what do the Packers specifically look for in a wide receiver, right? We obviously need to discuss this so you guys have some context, okay? So we have a few players that just did the combine testing that haven't done all the testing yet. And there's some that haven't done any, right? So I will probably add to this list at some point. I do think for the most part, the guys we're going to talk about today are the guys, but it's certainly possible that there could be more added to this list. So what do they look for? The Packers look for a guy who's over 6 feet, mostly over 6'1", truthfully. Somebody who's at least 200 pounds, somebody who's fast and athletic, and then they can also run block. So we're going to be talking a lot about RAS score, or RAS, R-A-S, Relative Athletic Score. Okay, so essentially what it is a compilation of athletic testing numbers that are sort of combined with height, weight, right? It's a scale of 1 to 10. Some of you might know this, some of you don't, but I think it's 90% of the Packers draft picks under Goody have had at least a 7.5 relative athletic score to a 10. So basically 7.5 to 10. So really high-end athletes. The people that they've picked outside of those thresholds, let's take a guy like Amari Rodgers, right? They've been at least 210 pounds and they can run block, right? But as you know, Amari Rodgers is a guy who didn't pan out, right? He was essentially picked to be the slot receiver, and then Aaron Rodgers wanted Randall Cobb here, and so on and so forth. Now, Jayden Reed is outside of their norm, okay? But he has a very specific skill set in this offense, and he's basically their slot wide receiver. So again, they're not going to draft anyone to replace Jayden Reed, and they're not really going to draft his backup because they have him already in Bo Melton, okay? So again, they have to be at least, we're going to say 6'1" for today's exercise, over 200 pounds, and a 8 or better relative athletic score. So that's everybody that we're going to talk about today. It fits into those categories. So like I said, I've gotten some messages. I've certainly seen a lot of like Packer fan mock drafts out there who, have players like Jalen Noel and Jalen Royals. I think I'm getting their names right. There's a few others out there that are people, they really like wide receivers that people really like. If they are not at least in this threshold, the Packers will not pick them. Okay. So some of these wide receivers, Tez Johnson's another one I've heard a lot about. Luther Burden as well. Excuse me. They are people who, again, would be redundant with Jayden Reed. He's already outside of their norm, like I said before. Randall Cobb was too, right? But he was really drafted to be Greg Jennings' replacement, right? Cobb was drafted in 2011, and Greg Jennings' last season was 2012. So by the time Randall Cobb was ready to take over, they let Greg Jennings walk and go to the Vikings. The other thing we're looking for is guys who are 23 or under. They also like guys who went to the Senior Bowl and performed well, ideally. And then the last thing they look for is a guy who's productive, right? The other commonality, and this is tough because we only have a couple guys who've done this, the testing here. They want a guy who has a sub 7 3-cone and a sub 4.5 short shuttle, okay? Everybody that they've drafted under Brian Gutekunst has fit that mold, okay? So every receiver that they've picked, again, has fit that mold. Under a 7 3-cone, under a 4.5 short shuttle. So again, these numbers, they kind of showcase whether the person can move laterally. So they kind of liken that to, route running and whatnot, short speed, long speed, all that, okay? So for today's exercise, there's not a lot of these receivers that I'm going to go over who've done the 3-cone and short shuttle. Those probably won't come until the person's pro day, okay? Once we know the 3-cone and the short shuttle, we can start narrowing the list down even more. And we will do that, by the way. But for today, every one of these guys has an 8 or better relative athletic score. They fit the size that the Packers are looking for. And we're going to sort of go in order of the consensus board, which if you guys don't know what the consensus board is, it's basically a site that sort of compiles all the major draft sites and brings them into one. So it's kind of a good predictor of where people are thought of. I think there's like up to, I want to say it's like 15 different draft boards that they figure in. And typically how close a player lines up with the consensus board, it's had a pretty good success outcome as well. So again, guys who didn't really match up with the consensus board, someone like Tyron Hopper that the Packers picked last year, he was projected to go in the 6th round and they picked him in the 3rd. There have been other examples, even under Goody, like Josiah DeGuara, Jay Sternberger, other ones who've been really big reaches. Anyway, we're going to read through the draft profiles today. Again, these are not my draft profiles. I will comment on them based on what I saw on tape. But again, these aren't like my words, so I want to make sure that's clear. We're going to start with Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona. He is going to be a top 10 pick. We're going to exclude him from the discussion today because, he's not going to be there when the Packers pick. I think they would love him. He's 6'5", 210, really, really productive. If he were to fall past 15, which I would assume would be very unlikely, I think that they would be interested in trading up for him. That's how good he is, right? First guy we're going to talk about, Emeka Ibuka from Ohio State. So he's number 19 on the PFF board, and he's number 29 on the consensus board, which is actually sort of lower than I thought. So he is in that range there in the first round where the Packers could pick him, theoretically. He's 6'1", 205, so he fits the size profile. He's really a well-built dude. He's super dense. He's very, very productive at Ohio State. So again, those of you that know, Ohio State just like poops out amazing receivers. We don't have any athletic testing for Ibuka. He didn't run at the combine, but basically those people that have watched him closely, especially his lateral agility, they're going to be really good numbers. The only thing I'd be concerned about is his long speed's a little bit, he's not a super fast guy, but he's super sure-handed. He only had 5 drops last season, so again, really sure-handed. He's probably not a superstar guy, but he's got probably the highest floor of any guy in the draft. So do I see him being like a bona fide number 1, like a Garrett Wilson from there, or, pick your other wide receiver from there, Chris Olave? I don't think he's that good. He could be, but he could still be a number 1. So he's the guy that you look for on 3rd down and 8, when you need it, right? Sort of like what we were envisioning Devontae to be for this season. That's what I could see Emeka Egbuka being. So let's go through his draft report. This is the NFL Draft Buzz site. Strengths. He has a rare combination of elite long speed and technical route running. Natural hands catcher who extends away from his frame and shows exceptional ball tracking ability on vertical routes. Savvy route technician who varies tempo and uses subtle head-shoulder fakes to manipulate defensive backs' positioning. That is all over his tape, by the way. Very sharp cuts at the end of routes, minimal telegraphing, so in other words, not showing the defenders what he's going to do. He consistently creates separation through precise footwork. He has advanced feel against zone coverage and an innate ability to find soft spots in the zones and clear throwing windows. He's electric after the catch, combining track speed with vision and instincts honed in the return game. Runs with competitive toughness, shows willingness to work through traffic. Immediate special teams contributor, that's a good thing. And last thing, he's an incredibly gifted run blocker. And those of you that know, Matt LaFleur needs the receivers to be a good run blocker. So he checks all the boxes there. Again, the scouting report for NFL Draft Buzz said he has that elite long speed. I don't really see that on tape. I think he's got good speed. I would say above average speed, but he's not a burner. And other draft sites have said the same thing, that he's not like a super high-end athlete. But again, it's all over his tape. The dude can win against man and zone. He kind of reminds me of what Devontae looked like coming out. Really, really strong release package. He's very, very, very good hands. And again, he just kind of makes it look easy. If you guys remember Jackson Smith-Njigba, he's on the Seahawks now. He was also an Ohio State receiver. Another guy who could just get open at will. Ibuka's like that. Let's go through his weaknesses. There's durability concerns after an ankle surgery. He missed 3 games during 23. Limited experience working through press. I do think that's a factor, by the way. He has an average size frame, which can lead to difficulties positioning against longer, more physical corners, which, again, NFL corners are all going to fit that mold for the most part. He could show more consistency extending the catch radius outside of his frame. Sometimes he struggles to sustain blocks against bigger defensive backs. I don't know if I agree with that from what I saw. He's a freak in the run game, guys. He really is. So let's kind of summarize. Ultimately, I think Egbuka would be a really good fit here in round 1. I think he will be there when the Packers pick. The only thing is he's not going to help with the fact that they need a vertical threat, okay? So he solves one of the problems, right? He can beat man coverage. Again, I think that's something the Packers do not have. They were really, really poor against man coverage last year, especially when Watson went out. I also think he has the highest probability of being good out of any receiver in the entire class, okay? So that's Emeka Egbuka. Love him. Next guy, Matthew Golden from Texas. We're just going to touch on him really, really quickly just because of his speed. He's probably my favorite receiver in the class, just like personal favorite, but he's really small. He ran that 4.29 at the combine, which is actually a lot faster than anyone thought he would run. I know Mike Renner from CBS Sports, one of my favorite draft analysts, he said that, he thought he would run a 4.4. And I would agree with this next thing. A lot of people said he didn't look that fast on tape. I would agree. I think he would probably be my favorite receiver, like I said, in the class, but I don't think the Packers are going to want him. He's 5'10", 190, and I think 190 is being generous, just being candid. I'm not trying to pick on the guy, of course, but I don't think the Packers are going to like him at all. But I just wanted to touch on him really quick because he is an athletic freak. He would solve the deep threat problem that they have, but again, he's very small and he's not a good run blocker, so we're going to kind of take him off the list. I just wanted to cover him quick because he had a really good combine, and I think he's awesome. Now, next guy, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. We talked about that in the last episode. I gave you guys a few names to look at. He's one of them. He is skyrocketing on draft stock right now. He was a Senior Bowl guy. He was kind of a second to third round guy before the Senior Bowl. And then he got there and showed out at the Senior Bowl. He's currently 51 on the PFF board, 67 on the consensus board, which I think both of those are a lot lower than he's going to go. There's not a lot of guys with his size and speed at the top of the draft. I think that's going to push him up. So let's talk a little bit again. The Senior Bowl. Okay. Guys, the Packers have I'm going to talk about this with every draft preview. The Packers love Senior Bowl guys, especially guys who did well. This is the list of receivers who are at the Senior Bowl that the Packers have. Romeo Doubs, Bo Melton, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, and Jaden Reed. So basically every receiver that they've picked under Goody participated and did well at the Senior Bowl. So again, Jaden Higgins fits that perfectly. He's kind of thought of now as an early second rounder creeping into the first round. And guys, if they took him at 23, I would be ecstatic. So we talked a little bit about Ibuka a minute ago, right? He has a really high floor, but I think Jaden Higgins, while he has a lower floor, I think he has a much higher ceiling. So I think Jaden Higgins could be the best receiver in this draft by far. He has bona fide number one wide receiver ability. I'm a huge fan of Jaden Higgins. So measurables, he's 6'4", 214, so he fits the size threshold the Packers are looking for by a mile. He has a 39-inch vertical, but at 6'4", 214 is insane. He didn't run the 3-cone and short shuttle, but you can see his lateral quickness on tape. There's no way he wouldn't hit those numbers. He ran a 4.47 in the 40. His final relative athletic score was 9.87. So again, 9.87 out of 10. He had a 99.9 receiving grade in the intermediate part of the field per PFF. That's insane. So middle of the field guy, so 10 to 20 yards deep. That's what that means. He had a 99.9 receiving grade. This one's crazy, especially after the Packers last year. He had 7 drops in 4 years of college. So that's insane. If you guys haven't watched his highlight tape, please do. It's so fun. So his positives, according to the draft buzz, high football IQ. He can play all 3 wide receiver positions. I agree with that. Soft and reliable hands, rarely drops passes. We had that just a second ago. He's a grass finder against zone, identifies weak points in coverage. A very smart guy. One thing I would say too, everything he does, guys, he just he makes it look easy and fluid. Tough catches, right? Like sideline catches and stuff. He just makes them look easy. He also wins in contested catches situations with body position, late hands, and ball tracking. Those are all of his positives. I completely concur with all of that. Negatives. He will not wow anyone in the straight line, adequate burst acceleration department. I disagree with that on tape. I think he looks like he's running at half speed sometimes, guys. And you can see it in that gauntlet drill that they run at the combine. He's running he's not even running that hard, and he's just flying through there. So I think he's great at that. He's an average run blocker. For a receiver of his stature, that's another one. I would agree with that. His release package against press leaves a lot to be desired. I think he has a really high potential to be a good route runner, but we just haven't seen it yet. Last thing, could be pigeonholed as a power slot receiver at the next level. That's fair. All in all, he's a tier 1 Packers type all day. And I mean that, guys, all day. The Packers are going to absolutely love him. I would not be surprised one bit if they don't pick him at 23. If they're not able to get DK, and obviously they didn't get Adams, right? There really aren't a lot of other receiver options out there. He is somebody I think the Packers would be all over at 23. Next guy, Alec Ayumanor from Stanford. He's 6'2", 210, so he fits the size profile. He's super productive. He's only 21. He didn't do any athletic testing, but he's really high on the consensus board. He fits that profile, so I figured we'd touch on him quick. PFF compared him to James Jones. I could kind of see that. He doesn't wow you when you're watching him, right? Just like James Jones didn't. But he has that size. I'm just not convinced he's athletic enough, and he certainly will not fit the vertical threat guy that we're looking for this year to replace Christian Watson. So his scouting report from PFF, pros, frame, and willingness to help him effectively block through the whistle. He definitely is a good blocker. The Packers will like that. Explosive athlete who can accelerate quickly with good top speed. So some draft sites have said they don't think he has any huge speed. I would agree with that watching him. Conscious of release technique to attack different leverages, showcases a high football IQ, and he's effective getting off press. That part right there is on his tape. And that part right there could help the Packers. He can beat man coverage. He's just not going to be your deep threat guy. So, again, I'm not super convinced the Packers are going to love him, but he's kind of a day 2 guy, early day 2, middle of day 2. So I think like round 2 to round 3 guy. I don't think he'll get to the Packers in the 3rd round. And he probably is too early of a pick at 53 in the 2nd round. His cons, hands could be stronger, especially in traffic. Definitely true there. Takes extra time to stop or change direction. Very true there. Low separation routes against single coverage. So, again, I don't think he's going to be a Packer, but it's sort of interesting to see there aren't a lot of guys in that early part of the draft that fit the Packers mold. I would say that he's one of them. Now, next guy, probably my favorite wide receiver after Higgins that the Packers will pick. Again, Matthew Golden's my favorite receiver in general, is Jack Betch from TCU. We talked a little bit about him in the last episode. He's a prospect to watch. He came into the combine, crushed it. He had an insane Senior Bowl. So again, Senior Bowl, he performed really, really well at the Senior Bowl. So check. He's 6'1", 214. So there's the size profile. He had a 9.26 relative athletic score. So well within the Packers range there. Here's the fun part. He cleared the 3-cone and short shuttle numbers by a mile. He had a 3-cone of 6.84, which is awesome. Okay. He didn't run the 40, which we'll talk about in a second. I think long speed is a concern that a lot of scouts have, and you can kind of see it on tape. I don't think the 40 will kill him as a Packers guy. I really don't, but I could be wrong on that. He had a massive production in 2024. So again, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. He is a really fun player to watch, guys. I really would encourage you guys to watch his tape. Jack Betch from TCU. So his last name is spelled B-E-C-H. I don't know if that's how you say it. It might be Beach, Betch. I don't know. You guys can decide. But again, his tape is really, really, really fun. He's a really high character guy. I'm not sure if you guys know this, but his brother was killed in that New Orleans bombing incident, which is just really, really sad. PFF's comp for him was Michael Wilson, who's a receiver for the Cardinals. I don't really see that very much. He kind of reminds me of T. Higgins. There's another guy that we'll talk about later that also reminds me of T. Higgins. But let's go through the pros from PFF, okay? So power slot, who spent time at tight end and wide receiver. The dude is tough as nails. He really reminds me of Jordy Nelson, by the way, guys. He never quits. One thing that I'll give you guys, and by the way, this isn't just because he's a white wide receiver, by the way. I know that's probably the first thing anyone's thinking here. Yeah, he reminds me of Jordy Nelson because he's white. No, he's one thing that Jordy did, guys, and you all remember this, right? He was a lot faster than he looked, right? But when people go to hit Jack Betch, he just never goes down. He fights like hell. It's so fun to watch. I promise you guys, his effort, his motor is off the charts. Impressive quickness in his footwork releases for a bigger receiver. You can definitely see that. Playmaker mentality. Doesn't go down on first contact, even if wrapped up. Again, like I said, that's all there. Long speed is adequate. Doesn't go down on first contact. Sorry, I already read that part. Very sure hands, good feel for soft spots in the zone. Really good at contested catches. That's one thing I would completely agree with. Now, cons, he's not going to be a purely athletic winner in the NFL, though he pairs his athleticism with savviness. I would agree with that. Like I said, very smart guy. His routes can lack nuance outside of breaks. He doesn't have a lot of experience against press. I definitely agree with that. Needs to maintain blocks longer. I think he's a willing blocker, though. And then the last con, he's played through injuries or missed time over the last 3 years. So, in summation, the Packers are going to be interested in Betch for sure. I think he'll be there in round 2. It'd be way too early to pick him in the first round. He's not a first round guy. But there is a world where the Packers might trade down this year, like, maybe trade from 23 to 34 or whatever. If they do that and they get like an early second, he'd be perfect for there. So the wide receiver class, again, it's not super good at the top, right? I think it's a really good receiver class as far as depth goes, but it's not as good as previous years. It's not 2020 or 2021, obviously. So that could push him up a little bit, but I ultimately think he's a round 2, maybe round 3 guy. If he's there at 54, whatever the Packers pick, I think it's 53, guys. I'd love him there. but he's not a round one guy. Okay, next guy, Trey Harris from Ole Miss. He's a guy I really like too. He's probably going to be a second rounder, maybe early third. But his combine was pretty good, at least compared to what people expected. I watched his film. He's really sneaky fast laterally. So again, quickness-wise, he's really, really quick, going side to side. He's not a blazing speed guy, but I think the Packers will like him because he's 6'3", 205. One side had him at 6'2", one had him at 6'3". He looks more like a 6'3" guy. He didn't do agility testing, so no 3-cone, no short shuttle. But he ran a 4.54, which is solid for that frame. He's extremely productive in college. Okay, so again, productivity in college is one thing the Packers look for. Last season, he had 60 catches for 1,030 yards and 7 TDs. But he had a 17.2 yard average, so another one of those deep threat guys. So again, that's something the Packers need, deep threat. This is the first guy that we've read off so far that has that that long speed, and somebody who I think can win deep, which again is what we need. Scouting report, not a very diverse route runner, but does well to get vertical. That's very true. Good contact balance and strength for yards after catch. That's very true as well. He was Mississippi's go-to receiver the past 2 years. He shows active hands to chop when running by defenders vertically. I put on here too, he's very Mike Evans-like, not just like, he doesn't have the same deep speed that Evans does, but he's got a huge, massive catch radius. So it allows him to kind of win on deep throws despite not separating a ton. You know, he's the kind of guy who, I never want to put Randy Moss next to anybody, but he's a guy who doesn't beat you deep with speed, but he can kind of like out leverage you, and he kind of has some wiggle to him. And if it's a jump ball, he's going to win it, guys. It's all over his tape. So again, he's able to do that in college. Will he be able to beat NFL corners? That's to be determined. As far as cons go, slow feet out of his release, mainly uses a speed release. Does not get off of press well, as a player of his size should. That's very true, by the way. He causes separation with strength and push-offs instead of more subtle quickness and savviness. So again, he's not a not a lateral guy, but he does have that deep threat ability that the Packers are going to look for. So I don't think he's worth any more than a third rounder, just being transparent, guys. I wouldn't be shocked if somebody took him in the second. It just won't be the Packers. I think his speed isn't quite what I would want in terms of that take the top off, and I don't think he's an all-around receiver that they could look for as like a Dobbs-Wicks replacement down the road. In terms of like a fit for 2025, I think he would be a good red zone threat. I like him there, as far as current, and maybe he's a developmental guy for 2 years from now, but he's kind of low on my list, but he is, in that third round range. I think he's 72 on the consensus board. I didn't write it down for some reason, but Trey Harris from Mississippi, another fit. Savion Williams from TCU, guys, he is a crazy watch. If you guys haven't watched him yet, if you're a draft nerd, look up Savion Williams from TCU. So I'm just going to touch on him really, really quickly. I saw his size and I watched his highlights, not his tape, but his highlights. I was really, really intrigued. So again, I didn't watch any All-22 with him, but I really, really was fascinated. Where I first heard about him, Justice Mosqueda from Acme Packing Company, he was on the Pack-A-Day podcast. He was talking about Savion a little bit as a total wild card, by the way. And the reason being is because he had a ton of just bad drops last year. And I'm going to say it again, bad, with capital letters, bad drops. I don't think the Packers will be interested in that, but he's really, really fun to watch, guys. He's 6'5", 222. So size-wise, he's there, right? He didn't do any combine testing, but if you look at the tape, you can see how fast he is. There's this play, guys. If you look at the highlights, you'll see it. He fumbled. He was playing Wildcat quarterback, which, by the way, he did a lot of. He played a lot of running back too, kind of a Cordero Patterson kind of guy. He fumbled the snap and he went 5 yards deep, and then he took it up the middle and ran for another 40 yards or something. It was just insane how he's just really, really athletic. But he's a total toss-up, guys. Like I said, he is a toss-up and a half. I think some teams are going to have him in the second round. Other teams might not even have him as draftable because of how bad his drops were. Now, the drops could be a head thing, where he's just overthinking it too much, right? We've seen that a million times in the league. Like Devontae in 2015, for example. He's listed at 82 on the consensus board. He's 90 on the PFF board. So he's a third round guy. If the Packers picked him in the third round or the fourth, I'd be fine with it. But his athleticism is going to have some team head over heels for him. And it wouldn't shock me if it was the Packers. Quick pros and cons. Pros, elite contested catch receiver. That's the funny part. Like, just to pause really quick, guys. Again, just some of those drops he had were just like easy little slants. And then he would drop those, right? And then they'd throw it deep. He'd be like triple covered. He'd jump up and catch it with one hand. It's that crazy with the guy. Just, he makes the easy ones look hard and the hard ones look easy. It's that simple. So that's the first pro here. Impressive explosiveness and long speed for his size. Again, his side speed combo is unbelievable. Very strong upper body for blocking. Yes, he's a good blocker. Active hands at his break points to clear DBs and create separation. Also true. He was used out of the backfield as a quarterback or wildcat quarterback and running back. Cons, extends his hand too much when he pushes off defenders. That will get him a flag in the NFL, of course. His footwork is not as precise as it needs to be. He needs to win with his feet more. I would agree there. Again, bad drops. And then the last con, sometimes it's a false step out of his releases. So Savion Williams, guys, like I said, a very interesting prospect. Definitely worth looking up, especially if you want to get just like a fun tape to watch. But again, he's a total wild card. The Packers might love him. Again, size, speed. But they also might hate him because he can't catch. And he's also just super raw. So that's Savion Williams. Next guy, Torrey Horton from Colorado State. So he's a 6'2", 196 guy. So he's kind of borderline in size. He's tall enough, but he's not a big guy. He's currently projected to be a third or fourth rounder. He's at 109 in the consensus board, 132 on PFFs. He had a 9.40 relative athletic score, which is why he's on this list, by the way. He ran a 4.47, so his speed is really good, right? But it doesn't really show up on tape that he has like long speed, which is interesting. So this last season, he only played 5 games. So, 334 yards in 5 games. It's not terrible. But in 2023, he had 96 catches, 1,100 yards. So very, very big producer in 2023. Kind of like Dontavian Wicks. And actually, I would almost compare him to Dontavian Wicks, which is kind of crazy. If you watch Tay Wicks and you watch Torrey Horton's tape, it's very similar, ironically. They almost look alike when they run. It's kind of crazy. So again, he's a little on the light side, but he's really, really quick and athletic for 6'2". I would assume the Packers will like him. Like I said, he's a high relative athletic score guy. I really like his yards after catch ability. He's got really good hands. You can see like how athletic he is. He didn't do the lateral testing, so no 3-cone, no short shuttle. But I'd expect those to be quite good. And if he does run those at his pro day and they're in the Packers thresholds, I don't think they'll hesitate to draft him, even though he's not 200 pounds. Okay. Pros, great route runner for his size. Very true. His route running is his strength for sure. Strong hands, even through contact. Big catch radius. Dude, his arms are he's a huge wingspan. Hands are up and ready to fight off press contact. Yep, completely true there. Long strides help him cover ground even without great speed. Again, his speed, 4.47. That's kind of what it looks like on tape. I would say maybe a little bit slower. Next thing, nuance in his releases versus press. So again, guy who can beat press. Pairs that with active hands. And then fundamentally sound blocker. I didn't really see a lot of run blocking from him, but I'll trust PFF here. And again, if he blocks well, LaFleur's going to like that. Last thing, for a pro competitive player who takes pride in everything he does. So that's cool. Cons, slender build means he can get moved off his routes easier. That's the thing, guys. Like, again, the weight thing is probably the one thing that will turn off the Packers, him being under 200 pounds. And who knows? Maybe he's like actually a 185 guy who just bulked up for the combine. Who knows? The other con here is average to below average top speed for the NFL. So, again, he has really good short speed. And you can see it. I think his 10-yard split was really good. I don't have the number in front of me. But it's not somebody, I don't think he's going to be a deep guy. He's going to be a yak guy who can get open on third down. So again, somebody the Packers could need, but you're not going to have him doing that this year, right? Lack of mass impacts his blocking efficacy. Again, I would trust PFF on that. all in all, I like his route running. I love his yak. If they picked him in 2025 here, I don't see him being anything but a projection for 26, 27. But again, like the lateral quickness, love his route running. He could be, if he were to develop into that long-term number 2 or 3 to replace Dobbs or Wicks. Again, I wasn't even sure if I should watch him just because of his weight, but when I watched the tape, I was fairly impressed. So that is Torrey Horton from Colorado State. Next guy, Pat Bryant from Illinois. He's another borderline fit, so I won't spend a ton of time here on him. Not a speed guy, and his 40 guys was 4.64, which is really slow. If they draft him, again, he's not going to be the deep speed guy. He's going to be a depth piece. He could be a Dobbs-Wicks replacement if they can't sign them. And he's not going to fix their man coverage problem for this year. He's projected currently to be a 3rd or 4th round pick. So again, I figured I would touch on him for that reason. He's number 130 on the consensus board, 150 on PFF. He is a Senior Bowl guy, and he did well at the Senior Bowl, by the way. So he checks that box. He's a great blocker. 6'2", 204, so the size is a fit. Again, that 40-yard dash, though, 4.64 is where I'm concerned. He didn't do lateral testing either. Production-wise at Illinois this year, 10 TDs, 984 yards. So really, really productive guy. And again, Senior Bowl standout. So I would expect there to be some interest there from the Packers. But again, that speed is going to have him pretty low on their board. I would assume they're going to have him as like a 5th round, 6th round guy. And he's projected to go on the 3rd, 4th, maybe 5th round guy. So we'll see. Pros, strong hands in 2024. He showed strong hands, including through contact, plus blocker in space for screen and swing passes. Again, you can see the blocking on tape. And LaFleur will like that. Useful in condensed sets due to blocking ability, above the rim type of catcher. That's also true, guys. The one thing I really liked about him, too, is he made a ton of contested catches. He kind of reminded me a little bit of, what's his name from, kind of like Antonio Brown was. I won't get too into that. Above the rim type catcher, shows good nuance in his short route running, releases for a big man. Shows good nuance in his route running and releases for a big man. So again, for his size, again, he's very good size. He does have a really good short, quick slant game, and he ran a ton of slants and quick short routes. They ran a lot of screens with him as well, but I just don't see him being a guy that could make a big impact this year. But again, he did fit the athletic threshold. He had I think it was an 8.46 relative athletic score. His cons: lack separation against single coverage. That's very obvious on tape. Hands could be more active against press. Also true. And the last thing, doesn't have the long speed to punish the defense when he finds space. Again, speed is his problem. So that's Pat Bryant. Again, liked his tape, but I don't think he's going to be highly regarded, just being honest. Next guy, Daquan Felton from Virginia Tech. So he was a Senior Bowl guy, so check there. 6'4", 213, check. 8.99 relative athletic score, check there. He did not do the agility testing, but he ran a 4.5 flat, which again, for 6'4", 213 is really good. The one thing he doesn't check the box for is production. He only had 400 some yards this year. So he's a complete projection type of guy. Like he's going to be, hey, he has potential to be a good receiver. We just haven't seen it yet type of guy. That's Daquan Felton. From the Draft Network, his accomplishments. Daquan Felton is a physically impressive athlete with room for progression in a multitude of areas of the position. Strength, size. He's a massive dude and he outmuscles people a ton on the film. Release package. His route running is really strong for his size, and I think it makes him intriguing. Agreed. His catch radius and his body control is good. I actually think, I mentioned I was going to talk about another guy who looked like T. Higgins on his tape. If you guys watch Felton, you can see a little bit of that T. Higgins there, where he's not beating people with quickness and speed necessarily. He's just savvy. And he has a ton of catch radius. Another one of those guys with just like, I don't know, his arms are probably 7 foot, his wingspan. So again, massive arm length. His concerns: shorter stride despite size. Here's the funny part. His yak ability is terrible, and this is one of the concerns here. As soon as he gets hit, he's done. And that's all over the tape, by the way. He reminds me a little bit of, what's his name? Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And guys, we just got word that DK Metcalf is going to the Steelers. Oh boy. Well, I'm quite disappointed in that. We'll talk about that plenty as we go on, but DK Metcalf is on the Steelers. Bummer. Another concern, top end burst. Rarely does he ever beat anyone deep. That's another thing. Again, he's kind of like a taller version of Dontavian Wicks. They have concerns with spatial awareness. So he is a fourth, sixth round guy. He's 115 on the consensus board. The guy that I read on NFL Draft Buzz said if he was drafted based on 2023, he would have gone higher. So I do think there's potential that, he could be, again, he's a projection. He kind of reminds me of EQ St. Brown too. If you guys remember Equanimeous St. Brown, the Packers drafted him in the 5th round in 2018. You can kind of see that a little bit here. They picked him in the 5th round. But he's intriguing, right? He could be a guy who develops long term. So I like his potential. Again, he fits some of the things that we went over. But again, I'm not super convinced the Packers will love him. Now, 2 more guys that we're going to go in depth on. We're almost done. I love this guy, Dante Thornton from Tennessee. Okay, so he's a late round guy, but hear me out. He's projected to be like a 7th round pick or later. I think the Packers are going to have him really high on their board, and we'll go over it in a minute why. He's 6'4", 205, so size, check. 9.8 relative athletic score. He ran a 4.3 flat 40-yard dash. 4.3 flat. And I think the Packers are going to love that athletic profile. He had an 82 PFF grade, but he was only targeted 34 times. So again, he wasn't a focal point for Tennessee, right? But here's the fun part, guys. He was targeted 34 times, like I said. He had 662 yards, so 26 catches on 662 yards. That's 25 yards per catch, which is insane. So here's why he's interesting. He is exactly what the Packers need to replace Christian Watson in 2025. And if they draft him tomorrow, he will immediately help the Packers. So, again, he's not somebody who's going to go in there and become Christian Watson, but he's fast enough and big enough that if they show that they're willing to throw deep on him, there's a chance that he could really help them out. So, again, we didn't get any agility testing from him, but, again, he can replace Watson in 26 if they don't bring him back. He's a speed demon. His strengths, downfield speed and ability, dude is just fast. He's faster than Christian Watson, faster than MVS. He's got a really good release package for being super tall. Strong hand usage. He uses nuance to separate. I put on here he uses his size well to separate. He doesn't just run by guys. He's kind of shifty, but he can run by guys. Biggest concerns here, his yak ability, and this is also true of Felton, who we just talked about. As soon as he gets hit, he's done. There's no run after the catch for this guy. He's literally just like, he catches it, he's going to get hit. So that's one thing. That's very obvious. He didn't have a very complex route tree at Tennessee. They didn't have him doing anything other than like posts, deep posts, and over routes and flies, right? But he has potential to be a good route runner. So again, I do think he reminds me of MVS a little bit, but I do think MVS didn't really have any ceiling to be a good route runner. I think that Thornton actually has a high ceiling for that. So he only had 2 drops last year. He had 7 deep catches, which is basically, I think it's 20 yards or over. His average depth per target was 16.2 yards, which is insane. So again, he was kind of just used like strategically and specifically for deep routes last year. I think he has a higher ceiling than just being a, hey, go run deep and I'll throw it to you kind of guy. I think he has a higher ceiling than that, but the reason I like him a lot is he has potential to be a really good all-around receiver too if he's coached right. So again, he can help in 25 to replace Watson, potentially in 26 to replace Watson if he doesn't re-sign. But he has a higher ceiling than that. So he's currently number 277 on the consensus board, and he's 199 on the PFF board, but I will promise you guys that the Packers have him higher than that. I could see the Packers picking him in the 4th, 5th, 6th round, even though he's projected to be a 7th. So that is Dante Thornton. Love him. Last but not least, and he's a dark horse, guys. Nobody's probably heard of this guy before, but he's a tier 1 Packer fit. He hit all the athletic testing they look for. His name is Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. So I really, really like him. Like I said, he's a tier 1 Packer through and through. His stats, he's 6'3", 202, but he looks bigger than that on tape. So I'm not sure if he slimmed down for the combine. He scored a 9.49 relative athletic score, which is crazy. His 40-yard dash was 4.52, but his 10 split was 1.55. So he can run to 10 yards in 1.5 seconds, which is crazy. So again, he has really, really short quickness. He's got that really strong lateral ability. I don't have his 3-cone and shuttle in front of me, but it was definitely within that range. Now, the weird thing is, on the consensus board, he's 4'11", so he's not a very highly regarded prospect at all. But again, I can guarantee you that the Packers have him higher than that on their board. I could see him being like a 6th-round, 7th-round guy, maybe undrafted guy. But again, Andrew Armstrong, Arkansas, throwing his tape. He's a lot of fun. I really, really liked his tape a lot. NFL Draft Buzz scouting report, his strengths, imposing catch radius with vice grip hands that pluck the ball away from his frame. That's all over his tape, by the way. He has really, really good hands. Plays with controlled physicality at the catch point, using his 6'4" frame to wall off defenders and create his own space in in-breaking routes. Shows impressive ability to track the ball in flight, adjusting his body and maintaining concentration on deep throws. Love that. Creates more after the catch than his testing numbers would suggest. So he runs with surprising anger and shows slipperiness in the open field. That's what's so fun about him, guys. There are a lot of like slant routes and like short digs where he just runs away from people. He's a reliable chain mover who delivered 34 first down conversions in 23. So this is why I like him the most. He's literally the guy for Arkansas who, when they need a few yards, they throw it to him. And that's what I think he needs to be for the Packers. So again, he's a dark horse guy that I really like. Really, really, really like. Reliable chain mover. Like I said, displays legitimate red zone potential with his size and jumping ability. He's got a great vertical too, guys. I think it's a 38-inch vertical. Crazy explosion. Brings competitive toughness as a blocker, willing to stick his nose in and create lanes. Another thing, he's a great run blocker. And last thing, he proved his production was no fluke against SEC competition. He actually improved his consistency and reliability against top-tier defensive backs. So again, for being as low on the consensus board as he is, I really like this guy a lot. His weaknesses: lacks the explosive first step quickness to threaten corners vertically. I just didn't see that, guys. His 10 split was really good. The NFL Draft Buzz obviously is seeing something different on tape. I can't really confirm whether or not I see that or not. Like, I'm not a whiz like these guys are. But his 40 shows up on tape a little bit. I would agree with that. He doesn't have a lot of deep throws in his game. He's a little tight in the hips and shows mechanical lateral movement, limiting his ability to make sharp cuts and explode through route transitions. I don't actually see that either in his tape. Now, again, I only watched like his highlights, and then I watched one of the games against Alabama. Press releases need significant refinement. That's very true. He struggles to defeat quick-handed corners. And then the last thing, disappearing touchdown production in 2024. He only had 1 TD last year. So they said it raises questions on his ability to finish drives. But again, that's also a projection. I really like him a lot, Andrew Armstrong. Again, he's not going to be a first-round pick. Obviously, he's not a third. He's going to be a later guy to watch. So just remember that name. I guarantee you the Packers have him high on their board. Last thing here, we're just going to touch on a couple of prospects who match the size they're looking for, and then they have the RAS, the relative athletic score over 8. Isaac Tesla from Arkansas, he had a 9.97 RAS score. He's 6'3", 214, so I think he's really intriguing. He's a 6th-round guy. He was a Senior Bowl guy. So I like him a lot. Isaac Tesla, his tape is fun too. Not a lot of production, though, there with him. So that's going to be, again, he'd be a later guy. On the consensus board, I think he's like 3'11" or something. Next guy, he had a perfect 10 relative athletic score. Isaiah Nayer from Nebraska. 6'4", 218. So he's got all the size that the Packers would want. Late round guy, though. I didn't watch the tape for Isaiah Nayer, but a freak show athlete. And again, he's really low on the consensus board, but very interesting prospect. Last one, Sam Brown from Miami. His relative athletic score was 9.87. Another late round guy. He's a little on the smaller side, 6'2", 200, but Again, freak show athlete, Sam Brown from Miami. Final rankings. Best fit for the Packers, Jaden Higgins. Number 2, Emeka Ibuka. Number 3, Jack Betch. 4, Alec Ayumanor. Number 5, Savion Williams. Yes, Savion Williams. He's so fun. Number 6, Trey Harris. Number 7, Daquan Felton. Number 8, Dante Thornton. 9, Pat Bryant. Number 10, Andrew Armstrong. Number 11, Torrey Horton. 12, Isaac Tesla. 13, Isaiah Nayer. And 14, Sam Brown. If the Packers draft a receiver, guys, I guarantee you it will be somebody from this list. If I'm wrong, you can stop watching the podcast immediately. I promise you somebody on this list will be a Packer. So, thanks for hanging in there, guys. A 50-minute episode. Free agency starts tomorrow, guys. We've already seen a bunch of stuff happen today. Obviously, we really should be reacting to the DK news. I really thought that the Packers were going to make some waves there and trade for him. Looks like he went for a 6th-round pick. Let me see what it says here. Just to see. We'll do it live right on this podcast, guys. I'll look at my phone here. They gave him a 5-year, $150 million extension. That is insane. And they gave up a 2nd-round pick. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think that's a little bit too rich for me personally. But it really does kind of emphasize the Packers need a receiver, and the options are dwindling quickly. We still have Brandon Ayuk out there as an option. Possibly the 49ers will be interested in trading him. Maybe Chris Godwin in free agency, right? But the Packers receiver options are dwindling quickly, and it's going to be one of these guys from this list in the draft if they can't sign anybody in free agency. So, again, free agency starts tomorrow. The legal tampering period is 11 a.m. our time. If they sign anybody, which I guarantee you they're going to have an active free agency, they better at least, we'll do an emergency episode breaking down anyone they sign or trade for this week. Again, I appreciate you guys listening for the full 51 minutes and 50 seconds. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Give it a like, download, leave a comment. And if you guys are not into podcasts, check out the blog. And I appreciate you guys listening. Have a great rest of your night.